My name is Nora. My husband banned me from our home on Christmas Eve because his boss was coming over and my mere presence would ruin his career. He handed me a cheap prepaid debit card and told me to hide in a motel. He had no idea that 24 hours later he would be staring at a television screen watching me destroy everything he ever worked for on live national television. I am 33 years old, and until recently, I believed I had to shrink myself to fit into my marriage. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through the pain of being entirely underestimated by the person who promised to cherish you. It was the evening of December 22nd. The air outside our Boston home was freezing with thick snow piling up against the tall glass windows of the master bedroom. Inside, the temperature felt even colder. I stood in silence at the foot of our king-sized bed, carefully folding a few dark sweaters and placing them into a small overnight duffel bag. The house, a sprawling $1.5 million property with high ceilings and pristine hardwood floors, was supposed to be our sanctuary. Instead, it had become the stage for my ultimate humiliation. David, my husband of 5 years, paced at the end of the room. He was 35 years old, a senior attorney at Pierce and Associates, and he wore his arrogance like a tailored suit. He watched me pack with an expression of mild disgust, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. There was no warmth in his eyes, no trace of the man I thought I had married. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a bright green prepaid credit card, and tossed it onto the mattress. It landed with a soft plastic thud right next to my winter coat. "Take this," he ordered, his voice clipped and devoid of any affection. "It has $500 on it. Find a quiet motel somewhere." I stopped folding a sweater and looked up at him. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, but I forced my face to remain completely blank. "Gregory Pierce is flying into town tomorrow morning." David continued pacing again. "He is the chief executive officer of my firm, Nora. The man holds my entire future in the palm of his hand. He and his family are staying here for the holidays. This is my one shot to secure the managing partner position. I cannot afford any distractions. I cannot afford you." He stopped pacing and stepped closer to me, looking down his nose. "You know how you are, Nora. Your messy startup lifestyle, your late nights staring at a computer screen, your awkward social presence. It is all going to embarrass me. Gregory expects perfection. He expects an elite environment. You walking around in oversized hoodies mumbling about your little business ventures will ruin my chances. You simply do not fit the image I need to project." The cruelty of his words hung in the quiet room. He was kicking me out of my own home for Christmas so he could play the role of the wealthy, successful bachelor playing host to his boss. He did not care where I slept or spent the holiday as long as I was out of his way. "And I want absolute silence," David added, his tone sharpening into a threat. "No phone calls, no text messages, no checking in to see how the dinner is going. You do not exist for the next 72 hours. If Gregory finds out I have a wife hiding in the background who cannot even hold a proper conversation at a dinner party, I will be a laughingstock." I looked down at the cheap piece of plastic on the bed. $500 for 3 days in a freezing city during the most expensive time of the year. It was an insult wrapped in a banishment. But the truth was, this moment had been building for years. Throughout our marriage, David had constantly chipped away at my self-esteem. He treated my work like a trivial hobby, a pathetic attempt to play business while he did the buzz that a rising legal star had settled for someone so hopelessly average. He made me feel like an underachieving burden that he graciously dragged along out of pity. And it was not just David. His entire family treated me with the same suffocating condescension. They openly wondered what he saw in me, whispering just loud enough for me to hear about how I was a freeloader riding his coattails. I had endured their passive-aggressive jabs at Thanksgiving dinners and summer barbecues, swallowing my pride to keep the peace. I had shrunk my entire existence to ensure his ego had enough room to expand. But as I stared at the green plastic card, something inside me finally snapped. The years of quiet submission evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not beg him to let me stay for Christmas. I slipped the cheap prepaid card into my pocket, I zipped up my heavy duffel bag and slung the strap over my shoulder. Understood, I said, my voice eerily calm. David let out a long breath, looking visibly relieved. He clearly thought his harsh words had put me right back into my submissive place. He thought I had finally accepted my role as his embarrassing secret. He watched me slowly shoulder the heavy bag, a cruel smirk resting on his lips. Exiling me to a cheap motel was not quite enough. He needed to twist the knife much deeper, ensuring I understood exactly how little I mattered. My parents and Diana will be arriving tomorrow afternoon, he announced, crossing his arms. They are helping me host Gregory and his wife. It has to look like a supportive family unit. And before you think about calling my mother to cry about this, do not bother. I already spoke to them this morning. I paused, my hand resting lightly on the zipper of my bag. You spoke to them. I repeated, my voice betraying absolutely no emotion. Yes, he scoffed, waving a hand. Actually said it was a massive relief. She thinks you are an embarrassment just like I do. Diana said having you here while I try to entertain the managing partner would be professional suicide. In the past, hearing that my own in-laws openly despised me would have crushed whatever fragile spirit I had left. I would have dissolved into heavy tears, begging David to tell me what I was doing wrong, promising to dress better, speak more eloquently, and be the perfect corporate wife he always demanded. He stood there, chest puffed out in his tailored suit, waiting eagerly for that exact pathetic reaction. He desperately craved the validation of my emotional breakdown to feed his towering ego, but I gave him absolutely nothing. I turned away from him in absolute silence and walked over to my small desk. I pulled open the bottom drawer and lifted out my sleek silver work laptop. It was packed with encrypted files, highly confidential proprietary algorithms, and the complex financial blueprints of a biomedical technology company currently valued at $2 billion. I slipped the device gently into the padded compartment of my travel bag, making sure it was completely secure. Are you even listening to me? David snapped, his voice rising as my suffocating silence dragged on. I am telling you that my entire family agrees you are a dead weight. You are a massive liability to my career and my future. You need to stay away. I zipped the laptop compartment closed. The metallic sound was incredibly loud in the tense silence of our master bedroom. I turned around to face him, my expression completely blank. He was sweating slightly, breathing fast from the sheer exertion of his own cruelty. I remained ice-cold, observing him not as a loving husband, but as a minor obstacle I was about to obliterate from my life. He was no longer the man I had foolishly promised to love in a pedestal he had built for himself. I heard you perfectly, David, I said softly, my tone completely flat. I walked right past him, close enough to smell his overpowering cologne, and headed down the wide, curved staircase. The polished hardwood steps creaked slightly under my heavy winter boots. I looked around the pristine house as I descended. The expensive property I had covertly paid the massive down payment for, using hidden funds from a corporate shell company, because David had blatantly lied about his personal financial stability right before we got married. He followed me rapidly down the stairs, his heavy footsteps thudding aggressively behind me. Remember the strict rules, he barked, sounding increasingly desperate to regain his upper hand. No phone calls, no text messages, no showing up unannounced. You stay completely invisible until Gregory leaves this house. If you ruin this opportunity for me, Nora, I swear to you, I will make your life miserable. You will walk away with absolutely nothing. We reached the massive kitchen with its gleaming dark granite countertops. I walked over to the large center island. I reached deep into my heavy winter coat pocket and pulled out my thick ring of keys. I unhooked the brass key. I held it tightly between my thumb and forefinger for a brief second, feeling the cold, jagged metal. And then I let it drop. It hit the hard granite counter with a sharp, resonant clink that echoed endlessly through the vast, empty kitchen. I did not need it anymore. I was never stepping foot inside this house as David's obedient, invisible, and silent wife ever again. I turned slowly toward the heavy front door. David was standing at the edge of the kitchen hallway, his posture arrogant and victorious. He looked down at the discarded brass key, then looked back up at me, a cruel, highly satisfied smile spreading slowly across his handsome face. He firmly believed my silence to his selfish will. I pulled open the heavy oak front door. The freezing Boston wind whipped violently into the warm foyer, biting sharply at my exposed cheeks and swirling white winter snow across the welcome mat. "Have a Merry Christmas, David," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and barely above a quiet whisper. I stepped out onto the freezing snow-covered front porch and pulled the heavy door firmly shut behind me, listening intently to the solid click of the deadbolt, locking him safely inside his own grand illusion. I walked away, my boots crunching against the ice, not looking back even once as I moved. David genuinely thought he had just banished a helpless, socially awkward, and pathetic failure out into the freezing cold night. He had absolutely no idea he had just unleashed a predator. I pulled my heavy winter coat tighter against the biting wind and walked purposefully down the icy sidewalk. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across the freshly fallen snow. I did not walk far. Just 2 blocks away from the sprawling, pristine house I had secretly paid for, a sleek black SUV sat idling quietly against the curb. The engine hummed with a low, powerful vibration, a sharp contrast to the silent suburban neighborhood. As I approached, my private driver immediately stepped out into the freezing wind, pulling open the rear passenger door for me with practiced efficiency. "Thank you," I said quietly, sliding into the heated leather interior. "Where to this evening, madam?" he asked, shutting the bitter cold out and settling back into the driver's seat. "The Ritz-Carlton, please," I replied, my voice steady and commanding. The heavy SUV pulled away smoothly from the curb, leaving the suburban illusion of my marriage far behind in the rearview mirror. I reached into my deep coat pocket and pulled out the bright green prepaid debit card David had tossed at me just moments ago. $500, freezing on the brutal streets of Boston. I stared at the green plastic under the ambient streetlights flashing through the tinted windows. It was almost comical. For 5 years, I had allowed him to play the role of the generous, dominant provider. I let him pay for dinners, brag loudly about his senior legal salary to his friends, and act like an absolute king in a castle he secretly could never afford on his own. I had shrunk my existence to protect his fragile masculine ego. I rolled down the window just a crack, feeling the icy air rush in, and flicked the prepaid card out into the violent snowstorm. I watched it disappear into the white blur, gone forever. We arrived at the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Boston shortly after. The towering facade glowed with warm, welcoming golden light, standing as a massive fortress of luxury against the bitter winter cold. The exact moment the SUV pulled up to the grand entrance, a uniformed valet rushed forward to open my door. Another sharply dressed staff member immediately took my modest duffel bag, handling it as if it contained fragile diamonds rather than a few old sweaters and a heavily encrypted laptop holding the keys to a $2 billion biomedical empire. "Welcome to the Ritz-Carlton, madam," the doorman greeted me with a crisp, respectful bow. I stepped into the opulent lobby. Massive crystal chandeliers sparkled brightly overhead, casting a rich golden glow over the polished marble floors and towering holiday floral displays. The scent of fresh pine and expensive vanilla filled the air, a world away from the toxic environment I had just escaped. I bypassed the standard reception line entirely and walked directly toward the private concierge desk reserved exclusively for elite guests. A sharply dressed concierge stood up immediately, offering a polished, professional smile. "Good evening. How may I assist you tonight? I need the presidential suite for the next 3 nights." Typing rapidly on his keyboard. "We do have the suite available this evening. It features panoramic views of the city skyline, a private dining room, and 24-hour dedicated butler service. May I have a card for the reservation?" I reached into my bag and bypassed my standard personal wallet. Instead, I unzipped a hidden secured interior pocket and pulled out a heavy matte black titanium card. It bore no personal name, only a sleek embedded tracking chip and an exclusive metallic finish. It was directly linked to the anonymous corporate trust that governed my massive personal wealth. I placed the cold, heavy metal onto the polished mahogany desk. The concierge picked it up, his professional smile faltering for just a fraction of a second as he registered the sheer weight and the ultra-exclusive nature of the card. He swiped it through the reader. The computer screen flashed an instant, unquestioned approval. "Excellent," he said, his entire demeanor shifting immediately from polite hospitality to extreme hushed reverence. "Your transaction is completely cleared. We will ensure your stay is absolutely flawless. Would you like us to arrange a private dining experience for you tonight? Just a bottle of your best vintage red wine sent up to the suite," I replied. "And absolute privacy. I am not to be disturbed under any circumstances." "Consider it done," he said, handing the heavy black card back to me with both hands, treating it with utmost respect. A private keycard accessed elevator whisked me up to the top floor. The polished doors slid open to reveal a massive, breathtaking suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping, uninterrupted panoramic view of the snowy Boston skyline. A grand piano sat in the corner of a vast living space, decorated in rich velvet and dark polished wood. A roaring fire already crackled warmly in the grand marble fireplace far below. David was likely sitting in our living room right now, feeling incredibly powerful and victorious. He was probably drinking a glass of my expensive scotch, patting himself on the back for effectively disposing of his useless wife before his important boss arrived. He truly believed I was currently shivering in a run-down roadside motel off the highway, crying into a cheap pillow, desperately waiting for his permission to come back home. He was fatally wrong. I was not a victim. I was not a fragile, helpless woman who needed an arrogant man to survive. I was entirely financially independent. I possessed infinitely more wealth and corporate influence than David and his entire prestigious law firm combined. I had spent the last 5 years quietly building a biomedical technology empire from the ground up, navigating ruthless boardrooms and crushing corporate rivals without ever breaking a sweat. I had worn my simple clothes and kept my head down at home because I genuinely loved him. I had wanted a peaceful sanctuary away from the vicious corporate world. I had wanted an equal partnership, not a business transaction. But David had mistaken my quiet humility for weakness. He had mistaken my unconditional love for pathetic dependency. I walked over to the plush velvet sofa and unzipped my duffel bag. I pulled out my silver laptop and set it firmly on the glass coffee table. I opened the screen and watched the highly encrypted interface light up the dark room. I was no longer the obedient, awkward wife shrinking in the corner of his life. That subservient version of me was officially dead, buried in the snow outside our front door. I was a predator, patiently waiting in the shadows. I had the boundless resources, the raw power, and the absolute perfect timing to strike back with devastating precision. David wanted a flawless Christmas to elevate his career. He wanted to impress Gregory. The butler had just silently delivered, took a slow sip, and began typing. The glow of the laptop screen illuminated the dark suite. I connected my device to the hotel high-speed network, establishing a secure encrypted tunnel directly to my private servers. Within minutes, my command center was fully operational. Financial portfolios, corporate communications, and legal blueprints cascaded across the monitor. But before I could dive into the corporate warfare, I was planning. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. A specific file caught my eye. It was the digital deed to the Boston house, the very house David had just banished me from. Seeing the property address glowing on my screen brought a bitter taste to my mouth, completely ruining the rich flavor of the vintage wine. The memories flooded in, sharp and suffocating. For half a decade, I had allowed that house to serve as a monument to David's monumental ego. More specifically, I had allowed his family to use that house as a weapon against me. I leaned back against the plush velvet sofa, letting the memories wash over me. Every family gathering, every Thanksgiving dinner, every Sunday brunch we hosted had followed the exact same toxic script. David's parents would sweep through the front doors, handing their coats to David while barely acknowledging my presence. His mother would immediately begin inspecting the cleanliness of the baseboards while his father would loudly praise David for providing such a magnificent home. I remembered a specific dinner party last spring. I was in the kitchen carefully arranging hors d'oeuvres on a silver platter. David's mother stood mere feet away, sipping her champagne and talking to her daughter Diana. They spoke at a volume perfectly calculated for me to overhear every single word. It really is a shame, his mother had sighed, swirling her drink. David works himself to the bone at the firm to afford a $1.5 million property. And what does Nora bring to that sharp, condescending sound she always used when looking at my simple, unbranded clothing? She is a charity case, Mom. David just has a savior complex. He wants to feel like a hero for rescuing a struggling woman. But honestly, she is dragging him down. She does not even know how to properly manage a house of this magnitude. I had stood there gripping the edge of the granite counter until my knuckles turned white. The sting of their cruelty was physical, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I had wanted so badly to walk into the dining room, snatch the expensive champagne glasses out of their hands, and scream the absolute truth into their smug, judgmental faces. Because the truth was an explosive reality that would have shattered David's fragile masculine pride into a million jagged pieces. David did not buy that house. David could not even afford a fraction of the mortgage on his senior attorney's salary. When we first got married, David projected the image of a highly successful, financially secure lawyer. He wore custom suits and drove a leased luxury car. But when it came time to actually purchase a home, the facade rapidly crumbled. He was drowning in massive law school debt. He had made terrible, impulsive investments trying to keep up with the wealthy partners at his firm. His credit score was an absolute disaster. When the bank ran his financials for the mortgage pre-approval, he was flatly rejected. He had come home that day completely devastated, his ego bruised and bleeding. He cried on our cheap apartment sofa, terrified that his parents and his colleagues would find out he was a financial failure. He felt like less of a man. And because I loved him, because I was foolish enough to want to protect his fragile pride, I saved him. I never told him about Jen. I never told him that the little online business I ran from my laptop was actually generating millions of dollars in revenue. Instead, I quietly to the escrow account, covering the entire down payment and the closing costs in full. I structured the mortgage so that it was heavily subsidized by my hidden LLC, making the monthly payments artificially low enough for David to comfortably afford on paper. The deed was legally held by my corporate entity, but I allowed David to act as the face of the transaction. I essentially bought the house and handed him the keys wrapped in a bow of plausible deniability. When the paperwork was finalized, David's sadness vanished instantly. He was suddenly a king again. He invited his parents over for a grand tour. I remember standing in the foyer watching him puff out his chest as his father slapped him on the back. "How did you pull this off, son?" his father had asked, looking around at the soaring ceilings. David had not even hesitated. He looked right at me, then looked back at his parents with a confident, arrogant smile. "I worked double hours, Dad. I pulled every string I had. I bought this place to give Nora a stable roof over her head. She is really struggling to get her little business off the ground, and I wanted to make sure she never has to worry about being homeless. I'm taking care of her." I had stayed perfectly silent. I smiled softly and nodded, swallowing the massive lie to protect his ego. I let him play the hero. I let his parents believe I was a pathetic dependent freeloader who contributed absolutely nothing to the marriage. I endured years of their thinly veiled insults, their sneers, and their utter disrespect, all to maintain the illusion that David was a powerful provider. I looked away from the memories and focused back on the glowing screen in my luxurious hotel suite. My fingers rested lightly on the keyboard. I had given up my voice, my pride, and my dignity to build a pedestal for a man who had just kicked me out into the snow to impress his boss. He believed his own lies so deeply that he actually thought he held all the power. He thought I was sitting in a cheap motel room right now, terrified of losing the luxurious lifestyle he graciously provided. He thought I was nothing without him. I took another sip of the dark red wine. The bitter taste of the past was completely gone, replaced by the sharp, intoxicating thrill of impending justice. There would be no more protecting his pride. There would be no more staying silent while his family mocked my existence. I opened the security interface on my laptop, preparing to execute the next phase of my plan. I was going to tear down his entire world brick by brick, using the very foundation I had paid for. Section 5. 1,000 words. Morning sunlight streamed through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my hotel suite, casting a bright, harsh glow over the remains of my previous life. It was December 23rd. I had slept surprisingly well on the plush mattress, unburdened by the constant anxiety of trying to please a man who actively despised me. I ordered a black coffee from room service, pulled my silver laptop onto my lap, and cracked my knuckles. It was time to pull back the curtain on David's grand performance. I opened the security interface application and typed in a complex alphanumeric password. A grid of high-definition video feeds instantly popped up on my screen, displaying every major room of the Boston house in crystal-clear color. I had installed these hidden cameras covertly 6 months ago. At the time, I was not looking for an excuse to leave my marriage. I was genuinely trying to understand why my husband had become so incredibly distant and cruel. David had started working unusually late, claiming endless hours of depositions and client meetings. He changed the password on his phone, flipped it face down whenever he set it on the counter, and threw vicious tantrums. He told me I was crazy paranoid and suffocating him with my pathetic insecurity. But I am a woman who built a $2 billion tech company based on data and predictive algorithms. I do not rely on emotions. I rely on hard evidence. So I hid micro cameras in the living room, the kitchen, the dining room, and the foyer. I wired them directly into a private encrypted cloud server that David could never possibly detect. I had not checked the feeds in weeks, hoping against logic that my suspicions were wrong. Now staring at the grid, I felt nothing but a cold clinical curiosity. The feeds showed my house looking absolutely immaculate. David had clearly hired a professional cleaning crew the second I walked out the door. The hardwood floors gleamed and the holiday decorations were arranged with aggressive perfection. On the kitchen island, a massive, expensive floral arrangement sat exactly where I had dropped my house key the night before. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I leaned forward, my eyes fixed on the foyer camera. David rushed into the frame. He was wearing a casual but incredibly expensive cashmere sweater and tailored slacks. He looked nervous, running a hand through his hair and straightening his collar. He took a deep breath and pulled the heavy oak door open. I braced myself to see Gregory Pierce. I expected to see the imposing 60-year-old managing partner and his elegant wife stepping out of the freezing snow, ready to judge my home and evaluate my husband for a promotion. But the doorway was completely empty of older executives. Instead, a young woman stepped out of the cold and into the warm foyer. She was 28 years old, draped in a luxurious white fur coat, with a designer handbag slung carelessly over her shoulder. Her dark hair was perfectly blown out, falling in glossy waves around her face. I recognized her instantly from the corporate holiday party photos David had previously shown me. It was Isabella Pierce, Gregory's pampered, highly entitled daughter. David did not have the deference of a subordinate hosting his boss's daughter. He slammed the front door shut, grabbed Isabella by the waist, and pulled her violently against his chest. I watched in absolute silence as my husband kissed another woman right in the center of the foyer I had painted, standing on the rug I had purchased. The kiss was not hesitant. It was desperate, familiar, and deeply passionate. Isabella wrapped her arms around his neck, dropping her expensive bag onto the floor, pulling him closer as they stumbled backward into the living room view. The audio feed kicked in sharply, capturing their heavy breathing and their hushed, eager voices. "I missed you so much," David whispered, burying his face in her neck. Isabella laughed, a bright, grating sound that echoed through my quiet house. "I thought you would never get rid of her," she said, pulling back to look at him. "Are you absolutely sure the pathetic wife is gone?" "She is gone." David promised, kissing her again. I told her Gregory was coming and that her embarrassing little startup aesthetic would ruin my career. I sent her to a cheap motel with a prepaid card. She was too terrified to even argue. She walked out into the snow like a beaten dog. "We have the entire place to ourselves until my family gets here tomorrow." Isabella smiled, running her manicured fingers over the lapel of his sweater. "My father still thinks I am at a spa retreat in Vermont. He has absolutely no idea I came here early to be with you. But you know he is going to promote you, right? As soon as you finalize the divorce and get rid of that dead weight, my father is making you managing partner. He wants a son-in-law who fits the firm's elite image. I will file the papers the day after Christmas. David assured her, pouring them both a glass of wine from the kitchen island. I just need to make sure I secure my half of this house. She will not fight me on it. She is too weak to hire a real lawyer. I sat perfectly still in my hotel suite, the hot coffee in my mug growing completely cold. The audacity of his delusion was staggering. He was not just cheating on me, he was actively plotting to steal the house I bought, using my hidden wealth to fund a new, luxurious life with his boss's daughter. He genuinely believed he had masterminded the perfect crime, securing a promotion, a wealthy new girlfriend, and a massive real estate payout, all in one swift move. The supposed business weekend was a complete and utter sham. There was no corporate evaluation. There was no strict formal dinner plan to impress Gregory Pierce. David had manufactured an elaborate, cruel lie to banish me into the freezing cold so he could turn my home into a romantic getaway for his mistress. He had used my devotion and my willingness to stay out of his way as a weapon to facilitate his affair. I watched them on the screen as they moved to the sofa, laughing and drinking my expensive wine. They looked so incredibly smug, so completely certain of their impending victory. I did not feel a single ounce of heartbreak. The love I had once harbored for David evaporated completely, leaving behind a sharp, crystalline void. He had handed me the exact ammunition I needed to annihilate his entire existence. I reached out and tapped a key on my laptop, setting the security system to record and back up every single second of their illicit holiday retreat directly to my secure cloud servers. Let them drink the wine, let them plan their grand penthouse future, let them revel in their stolen temporary happiness. The trap was set, the evidence was securing itself, and they were entirely blind to the devastation heading their way. I sat quietly in my massive hotel suite, a fresh cup of hot coffee beside my laptop. The digital clock on my screen struck 3. Right on schedule, the motion sensors on my front porch triggered an alert. Parents walked in, shaking snow from their coats. His sister Diana followed closely behind. Trailing them was Jamal, Diana's husband. He was a brilliant architect, an observant African-American man who always seemed out of place among David's pretentious family. He treated me with genuine respect, unlike his in-laws. While the others bustled inside with loud voices, Jamal simply wiped his boots and stepped inside without saying a word. Instead, Isabella glided into the foyer holding 2 crystal champagne flutes. David's mother gasped in delight, tossing her expensive coat onto the bench and rushing forward to wrap Isabella in a massive, enthusiastic embrace. "Isabella, darling," his mother gushed, kissing both her cheeks. "It is wonderful to finally see you in this house. You look absolutely stunning." "Thank you so much," Isabella replied, beaming as she handed the champagne flutes to David's parents. "I'm glad you all made it safely through the snow. David and I have been eagerly waiting for you." David's father offered Isabella a warm hug. "It is an absolute pleasure to have you here, Isabella. Gregory must be so proud. We are thrilled you could join us for the holidays." Diana pushed past her parents, squealing with loud excitement. She hugged Isabella tightly, complimenting her designer handbag, and immediately launching into a conversation about an exclusive country club they both attended. There was zero shock. There was no confusion. They knew. They had known all along. I sat frozen, my hands gripping the glass coffee table. The sheer audacity of the scene playing out on my screen was entirely suffocating. These were the people I hosted for 5 consecutive Thanksgivings. I baked for them, purchased expensive birthday gifts, and accommodated them at every turn. I spent countless hours listening to his mother complain about joint pain. We were standing in the foyer of the house I secretly bought, joyfully embracing the woman who was sleeping with my husband. David led the group into the living room. Jamal stayed near the back, choosing a small accent chair rather than the plush sofa. He kept his heavy winter coat on his face, an unreadable mask of quiet discomfort. David popped the cork on a vintage bottle of champagne, one I had specifically purchased and saved in the wine cellar for a special occasion. He poured generous glasses for his parents, his sister, and Isabella, completely ignoring Jamal sitting in the corner. David raised his glass high, a triumphant smile plastered across his face. "I want to propose a toast," David announced, his voice booming with confidence. "To family, to the future, and to moving up in the world. She represents everything I have been working toward." To Isabella, his mother chimed in, raising her glass. And to David for finally upgrading to an elite woman who truly understands our family values. They all clinked their expensive glasses together, the loud sound echoing through the house. Diana took a sip of champagne and sighed loudly. Honestly, David, it is an absolute breath of fresh air walking into this house and not seeing Nora moping around in her oversized sweaters. That woman brought the entire property value down just by standing quietly in the kitchen. Isabella laughed, a cruel ringing sound. David told me she did not even put up a fight when he kicked her out. She just packed her cheap little bags and trudged out into the freezing snow. It is pathetic, really. She has absolutely no backbone. She is a complete dead weight, his father agreed, shaking his head. I told David years ago that he was making a massive mistake marrying a woman with no ambition. A senior attorney needs a wife who can host partners. It was deeply embarrassing for all of us. Thank goodness she is finally gone, his mother added, patting Isabella's knee. You bring such a bright boarding house. We are just so incredibly relieved David is finally getting rid of that freeloader. The word struck me like a physical blow. Freeloader. I stared at the screen, my chest rising and falling with slow, calculated breaths. They were sitting on a custom Italian sofa I had paid for. They were drinking a $1,000 bottle of champagne I had personally selected. They were basking in the warmth of a luxury home that my hidden technology empire had fully funded. Every single piece of their comfort in that room was a direct result of my hard work and massive financial sacrifice. Yet they sat there insulated by their own arrogance, mocking my absence and enthusiastically celebrating my replacement. They genuinely believed I was a worthless, pathetic creature who had somehow scammed my way into their elite circle. They thought they had finally discarded the trash. The ultimate betrayal was not just David's infidelity. It was the complete enthusiastic endorsement of his actions by the very people I considered my family. They were not just complicit. They were active, joyful participants in my emotional execution. Their laughter echoed through the hidden speakers, each chuckle serving as a permanent reminder of their profound cruelty. I watched Isabella lean her head on David's shoulder, securing her place as the new wealthy queen of my castle. I watched his parents beam at them with absolute pride, raising their glasses one more time to toast my complete destruction. The agonizing pain of their betrayal slowly dissolved, burning away, until absolutely nothing remained but a hardened, terrifying resolve. My heart stopped aching and simply turned to solid ice. They wanted an elite woman. They wanted a ruthless high society player who understood the brutal nature of the corporate world. They were about to get exactly what they asked for, and it would cost them absolutely everything they held dear. I reached for my phone, entirely finger hovering over the edge of my trackpad. While the rest of David's family eagerly raised their expensive crystal flutes to celebrate my cruel banishment, one figure in the room remained completely motionless. Jamal sat in the high-backed leather accent chair positioned near the edge of the living room. Jamal was a brilliant 36-year-old African-American architect who had married into this toxic family 5 years ago. They tolerated him because his architectural firm designed high-end commercial properties, which gave them something prestigious to brag about at their country club dinners. But they never truly respected him. Jamal had always seen right through their superficial performances. He was a man of quiet integrity. Whenever David's mother made passive-aggressive comments about my clothing or my quiet demeanor at Thanksgiving dinners, Jamal was the only one who would subtly shift the conversation to protect me. He would ask me engaging questions about my day, treating me with the basic human decency his wife and in-laws completely lacked. Right now, on the high-definition security feed, his jaw was clenched tight. His dark eyes darted from David to Isabella, then to Diana, who was vibrating with malicious joy. Jamal did not hold a champagne glass. He had refused the drink entirely. He kept his heavy winter coat zipped up his hands, shoved deep into his pockets, signaling his absolute refusal to settle into this domestic nightmare. David noticed the glaring lack of participation. He lowered his champagne flute and shot Jamal a sharp warning glare. "Are you not going to toast to our future, Jamal?" David asked, his voice dripping with arrogant challenge. "It is a celebration. Try to crack a smile." Diana immediately nudged her husband's shoulder, her face flushed with champagne and irritation. Come on, Jamal, stop being so tense. We are finally having a proper family gathering without dealing with Nora and her depressing energy. Just be happy for my brother. The fireplace caught the low, steady rumble of his voice. I am not toasting to infidelity, David. Jamal said, his tone entirely devoid of warmth. And I am certainly not going to sit here and celebrate you throwing your wife out into a freezing snowstorm on Christmas Eve. It is pathetic. The entire room went dead silent. David's smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a dark, ugly scowl. His mother gasped loudly, clutching her pearl necklace as if she had just been physically struck. How dare you? David snapped, taking a threatening step toward his brother-in-law. You have absolutely no idea what I have dealt with for the past 5 years. Nora was a financial anchor dragging me straight to the bottom. Isabella understands the pressure of a high-powered legal career. She belongs in this house. Jamal stood up slowly. His towering physical presence instantly forced my husband to take a hesitant step back. You do not own this house, David, Jamal stated coldly. You have a mortgage you complain about every single month, and replacing your wife with your boss's daughter does not make you a powerful man. It makes you a desperate social climber. Diana grabbed Jamal's arm, panicking as she glanced at Isabella. Jamal, stop it right now. You are embarrassing me. David is making a strategic career move. I am going to get some air, Jamal replied, shaking off his wife's hand. Do not expect me to pretend this is normal. He turned his back on the stunned room and walked purposefully down the hallway, disappearing from the living room camera feed. My screen showed him entering the kitchen. He leaned against the dark granite island, pulled out his phone, and began typing rapidly. A second later, the heavy silence in my hotel suite was broken by the sharp vibration of my personal cell phone resting on the desk. I picked it up. A new message from Jamal illuminated the lock screen. They are cheering for him. Diana and his mother just brought in a box of heavy-duty garbage bags. They are throwing your belongings into garbage bags. I am not part of this sick play. Do you need a divorce lawyer? I can help you. I read the words twice, the stark reality of their viciousness cementing my absolute resolve. A cold, dangerous smile spread slowly across my face. Jamal was a good man, perhaps the only decent human being to ever marry into that wretched bloodline. He was willing to risk his own marriage to Diana just to pull me out of the wreckage. He believed I was sitting in a freezing motel room sobbing over a broken heart, completely stripped of my home and my dignity. He thought I desperately needed a legal savior to protect whatever meager assets I had left. He had no idea that I already controlled every single asset David claimed to own. He had no idea that I had a vast legal team on retainer funded by a corporate empire capable of buying and selling David's prestigious law firm before breakfast. I appreciated Jamal's loyalty. I truly did. But I did not need a divorce lawyer to fight for scraps. I needed him to stay exactly where he was and witness the incoming devastation firsthand. I tapped the glass screen of my phone, my fingers flying across the digital keyboard with clinical precision. No need. Keep quiet and watch the show. Thank you, Jamal. I hit send and placed the phone face down on the glass table. Back on the security feed, I watched Jamal read my response, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. He stared at his screen, trying to decipher the chilling calmness of my reply. He looked up, his eyes scanning the empty kitchen as if trying to sense my presence. He slowly pocketed his phone, shaking his head slightly before turning back toward the hallway. In the living room, the celebration had resumed with full force. David's mother was loudly directing Diana to head upstairs and start bagging up my clothes. Isabella was curled up next to David on the sofa, giggling as he kissed her neck. They wanted to throw my belongings into the trash. They wanted to pretend I was just a temporary stain on their pristine, wealthy lives. I reached over and closed the security feed window on my laptop. I did not need to watch them pack my old sweaters into garbage bags. Those clothes meant absolutely nothing to me. The entire house meant absolutely nothing to me. I had purchased it simply because David begged for a symbol of success, and now I was going to leverage it to orchestrate his spectacular downfall. I shifted my focus to a separate, highly encrypted digital folder on my desktop. The screen shifted from the domestic camera feeds to a complex dashboard of global financial markets, proprietary software patents, and secure banking portals. The time for mourning a dead marriage had officially passed. It was time to switch gears. I needed to shift my full attention back to the massive corporate machinery I had built in absolute secrecy. The real war was not going to be fought in family court over a suburban house. It was going to be fought on a national stage broadcast live to the entire business world, and I was holding all the detonators. I minimized the security application and brought my encrypted central dashboard to the forefront of the screen. The interface was a stark, minimalist black and silver, devoid of any flashy logos or identifying marks. A biometric scanner embedded in the keyboard required my fingerprint, followed by a randomized dual authentication code sent to an offline satellite device sitting on the desk beside me. I placed my finger on the sensor. The machine hummed quietly, processing the complex encryption keys before granting me full access to the inner workings of Origen. Origen was not a small, struggling online business. It was a massive industry, defining biomedical artificial intelligence startup that I had founded from scratch precisely 5 years ago. While David firmly stick platform, my algorithms utilize deep machine learning to analyze complex genomic sequences and predict aggressive autoimmune diseases years before symptoms ever physically manifested in patients. It was a complete paradigm shift in proactive medical treatment. When the initial clinical trials yielded a staggering 99% accuracy rate, Silicon Valley venture capitalists swarmed. They threw absurd amounts of money at my feet, desperate for a piece of the groundbreaking technology I secured 3 massive rounds of funding within a single year. By the time David was complaining to his mother about my lack of ambition, Origen had officially surpassed a $2 billion valuation. But I knew the corporate world was deeply treacherous. I knew that immense wealth attracted immense danger, and I possessed a husband whose greed and desperation for social status were absolute liabilities. David was a man who measured his self-worth entirely by the prestige of the people around him. If he had known his quiet, unassuming wife was suddenly a tech billionaire, he would have exploited my company to elevate his own name. He would have demanded a seat on the board. He would have paraded me around his arrogant law firm like a prized trophy, using my intellectual property to buy his way into the managing partner position he so desperately craved. So I built an impenetrable legal fortress to protect my life's work. I hired a team of elite international attorneys who specialized in total corporate anonymity. They constructed a labyrinth of holding companies, blind trusts, and offshore limited liability corporations. My name was meticulously scrubbed from every single public record, state registry, and corporate filing. On paper, Origen was managed by a faceless proxy board of directors, and I attended vital board meetings via secure voice-altered conference calls. I negotiated aggressive international acquisition deals through highly paid executive proxies who reported exclusively to me. I made billion-dollar decisions from a laptop sitting on a cheap desk in a suburban house completely undetected by the man sleeping in the room right next door. I pulled up the latest financial prospectus on my screen. The numbers were staggering. Origen was officially preparing for its initial public offering. We were going public. The financial media had been buzzing with frantic speculation for the past 8 months, endlessly debating the true identity of the genius who had built the biomedical juggernaut. The upcoming IPO was poised to be the largest, most lucrative technology market debut of the entire decade. Wall Street was frothing at the mouth, eager to underwrite the massive transaction. I opened my secure email client. The inbox was flooded with high-priority messages from my proxy board. They were forwarding the latest highly aggressive pitches from the most prestigious investment banks and elite law firms in the country. Everyone wanted the massive commission fee associated with handling the Origen IPO. The legal representation alone for an offering of this sheer magnitude would guarantee millions of dollars in billable hours for whatever firm secured the contract. I clicked on a summarized report detailing the top legal contenders actively begging to represent us. My lead corporate strategist had highlighted a shortlist of aggressive firms making desperate bids. I scrolled down the glowing list, my eyes scanning the names of the most powerful legal entities in the United States. They were offering absurd concessions, promising around-the-clock dedication, and flaunting their most ruthless senior attorneys in an attempt to impress the anonymous founder. I leaned back against the plush velvet that was currently reshaping global healthcare. I commanded a vast fortune that could alter the economy of a small nation, and I had done it all while patiently playing the role of a pathetic, awkward housewife. David always told me I needed to learn how the real world operated. He constantly lectured me about the brutal, cutthroat nature of high-stakes corporate law, acting as though he was a titan of industry, navigating a battlefield I could never possibly understand. He genuinely thought he was a giant among men stepping on my back to reach the top. He had absolutely no concept of the invisible towering empire casting a massive shadow directly over his head. I tapped the trackpad, pulling up the detailed legal bids. My focus narrowed with clinical precision. I was no longer just an estranged wife, dealing with a cheating husband. I was a chief executive officer, preparing to execute a hostile corporate maneuver. I needed to review the exact strategies these arrogant law firms were utilizing to win my favor. The financial documentation on my screen represented the highest echelon of corporate power, and I held the absolute authority to grant or deny access to that realm. A calculated smile crossed my face. The path was now illuminated. I had the flawless timing required to execute my plan and initiate his immediate downfall. I moved my cursor over the highlighted shortlist of legal contenders and clicked open the primary executive summary. The digital folder expanded, revealing a meticulously organized grid of the most elite corporate law firms on the Eastern Seaboard. These were multi-billion-dollar entities, boasting centuries of combined legal experience, all clamoring for the honor of guiding Origin through its initial public offering. I scrolled past the massive international conglomerates, my eyes scanning the polished pitch decks and aggressive financial proposals. My proxy board had ranked them based on aggression industry connection. Silver crest displaying the name Pierce & Associates. A harsh, humorless laugh escaped my throat, echoing loudly in the quiet luxury of the hotel suite. The irony was so incredibly dense it was practically suffocating. Pierce & Associates, Gregory Pierce, the very man my husband was currently attempting to impress by turning our suburban house into a holiday playground for his mistress. The man David viewed as a literal god of the corporate legal world was currently waiting in my digital lobby, desperate for my attention. I opened the attached proposal, submitted by Gregory Pierce himself. The pitch deck was a masterclass in corporate groveling dressed up as elite confidence. Gregory detailed his firm's impeccable track record, their unmatched dedication to their clients, and their absolute willingness to drop every other case on their roster to prioritize the Origin IPO. He wanted the $2 billion account with a frantic, palpable hunger. The legal fees associated with a transaction of this magnitude would secure his firm's financial dominance for the next decade. But the formal pitch deck was not the most revealing part of the file. My proxy executives had also forwarded the direct private email correspondence between Gregory and my lead corporate strategist. I clicked on the email thread, leaning closer to the glowing screen to absorb every single word. The email stripped away the polished corporate facade, revealing Gregory as a sweating, desperate executive pleading for a seat at the elite table. In his most recent message sent just 3 days ago, Gregory had pulled out absolutely all the stops. He laid out a comprehensive transition strategy, promising that Origin would receive round-the-clock personalized attention from his most brilliant minds. To ensure your complete satisfaction, Gregory had written, "I will personally oversee the high-level strategy. However, the day-to-day operations, the aggressive contract negotiations, and the relentless groundwork will be spearheaded." Sacrifices everything for his work. Securing the Origin YPO is our top priority, and I have personally promised David that delivering this account will immediately secure his promotion to managing partner at our firm. We are hungry for this, and we will not fail you. I stared at the words glowing against the dark background of my monitor. I read the paragraph again, letting the sheer magnitude of the situation wash over my entire body. David was the lead attorney assigned to win my account. Gregory Pierce was dangling the managing partner position like a carrot on a stick, and the only way David could reach it was by successfully courting the anonymous founder of Origin. David had spent the last 5 years building his identity around his intellectual superiority. He had mocked my modest clothing, sneered at my late nights typing on a laptop, and proudly declared me a financial deadweight to his parents and his sister Diana. He had banished me to the freezing streets of Boston on Christmas Eve, terrified that my awkward presence would ruin his chances with Gregory. He was desperately trying to impress Gregory, so Gregory would give him the Origin account, so David could finally become a wealthy managing partner and provide a lavish life for Isabella. The entire foundation of David's towering arrogance rested squarely in the palm of my hand. He was exhaustively working himself into the ground, betraying his marriage, and parading his boss's daughter around my house, all in a desperate attempt to impress a company that his supposedly worthless freeloader wife literally owned and controlled. I picked up my glass of vintage wine and took a long, slow sip. The flavor was rich and dark, perfectly matching the venomous satisfaction pooling deep in my chest. David thought he held all the power. He thought his affair with Isabella Pierce was the ultimate strategic career move. Parting me was the final glorious step in securing his elite future. He was entirely oblivious to the fact that I was the judge, jury, and executioner of his entire career trajectory. I held the heavy iron keys to his kingdom. I could grant him the wealth and status he craved, or I could financially decapitate him with a single stroke of my keyboard. I pulled up the corporate response interface, establishing a secure connection to my proxy board. My fingers rested lightly on the keys. I did not want to simply reject the Pierce & Associates bid right now. A standard corporate rejection letter was far too quiet, far too clinical. It would not inflict the necessary public devastation. If Gregory Pierce quietly lost the bid today, David might simply find another avenue to climb the ladder. He would marry Isabella, live in the house I paid for, and continue his life of arrogant deception alongside his horrible family. That was entirely unacceptable. I needed David to fly as high as possible before I cut his wings. I needed him to stand on the absolute pinnacle of his false victory, surrounded by the people who had mocked and discarded me before I tore the ground out from under his feet. I began drafting a highly classified directive to my lead corporate strategist. I instructed them to immediately string Gregory Pierce along. I wanted Pierce & Associates to believe they were the absolute frontrunners for the Origin YPO. I ordered my proxies to request further documentation, demand more of David's personal time, and inflate Gregory's expectations to an absolute fever pitch. I wanted David working through the holidays, obsessing over my company, dedicating every ounce of his energy to securing a deal that I was going to publicly weaponize against him. Let David boast to his parents about his impending promotion. Let him toast with Isabella in my living room, celebrating the massive corporate victory he thought he was about to secure. Let them all believe that the bait was placed perfectly, and David was eagerly sprinting directly toward it. I closed the email thread and locked the screen, the silence of the luxurious hotel suite matching the absolute unbreakable stillness in my heart. The quiet of the luxurious hotel suite was suddenly broken by a sharp, piercing ringtone. I glanced away from the locked laptop screen and looked down at the glass coffee table. It was not my standard personal cell phone. That device had remained completely silent, entirely ignored by David and his family. The sound was coming from my secondary device, a heavily encrypted military-grade satellite phone I kept strictly for high-level corporate emergencies. Only 3 people in the entire world possessed the direct number to this device, and they all knew never to call unless the situation was exceptionally critical. I picked up the heavy black phone, swiped my thumb across the biometric scanner, and answered without offering a greeting. "We have a major development, founder," my lead proxy executive stated immediately. His voice was crisp and highly professional, filtering through the secure connection. "I apologize for interrupting your evening, but I just received a direct communication from the National Committee for the Tech and Business Innovator of the Year Awards. The chairman insists on speaking with you personally. It is highly urgent." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the snowy Boston skyline. "Connect him," I commanded. A brief click echoed on the line, followed by the deep, resonant voice of Harrison Caldwell, the Billionaire chairman of the most prestigious business committee in the United States. Winning a Caldwell Award was the absolute pinnacle of corporate validation. It was the kind of recognition that instantly transformed a successful entrepreneur into a global industry titan. "It is an absolute honor to finally speak with you, Harrison," began, his tone dripping to uncover the brilliant mind behind the most revolutionary biomedical technology of our generation. "I am calling tonight with phenomenal news. The voting committee has reached a unanimous decision. You have won the grand prize for Innovator of the Year." I stood perfectly still, letting the sheer magnitude of his words settle over me. This was the highest accolade achievable in my field. David had spent our entire marriage attempting to climb the local corporate ladder, bragging about minor court victories and desperately sucking up to middle management. Meanwhile, I had just been crowned the most innovative business leader in the nation by a committee of actual billionaires. "Thank you, Harrison," I replied, keeping my voice incredibly calm and measured. "I accept the honor on behalf of my entire team at Origen." "There is a slight complication," Harrison continued, a hint of nervous hesitation creeping into his voice. "As you know, the grand prize is traditionally awarded during our annual gala. The event is tomorrow night, Christmas Eve. We have secured an exclusive broadcasting partnership with CNBC. The ceremony will be aired live on primetime national television. The global financial markets, the major venture capital firms, and every major player on Wall Street will be watching." He paused, taking a steadying breath before making his ultimate pitch. "We know you fiercely protect your anonymity," Harrison said carefully. "We were fully prepared to accept a video message from your proxy board. However, the media anticipation is currently at an absolute fever pitch. The upcoming Origen initial public offering has driven the market crazy. The business world is literally dying to finally see the face of the creator. I am personally asking you to step out of the shadows. I am asking you to attend the gala in person tomorrow night and accept this award on live television. It would be the most historic broadcast, and my mind raced with calculating speed, instantly connecting the dots of this unbelievable twist of fate. Tomorrow night was Christmas Eve. David was hosting Gregory Pierce for a high-stakes holiday dinner at my house. Gregory Pierce, the arrogant managing partner who was desperately salivating over the Origen account. I had just instructed my proxy board to inflate Gregory's hopes, forcing David to work relentlessly through the holiday to secure the deal. Gregory would absolutely force his ambitious senior attorney to watch the CNBC broadcast. They would sit in my living room, drinking my wine, watching the screen, with desperate, greedy eyes, waiting to analyze the anonymous billionaire they were trying to court. The alignment of fate was so flawlessly destructive it almost took my breath away. David had banished me to a cheap motel to hide me from his boss. He thought I was a pathetic, awkward failure who would ruin his career on Christmas Eve. Now he was going to be forced to stare at a television screen and watch that exact same woman stand on a national stage holding a golden trophy, commanding the total respect of the global financial elite. He was going to watch his discarded wife emerge as the literal queen of the corporate world. "Harrison," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously smooth pitch, "you have a deal. I will attend the gala in person tomorrow night. I will accept the award on live television. You will finally have the face of Origen." I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Harrison was absolutely thrilled, unaware that he had just handed me the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. "That is phenomenal news," Harrison replied, his voice practically shaking with excitement. "We will arrange a private security detail and a very important person entrance for you. The media will absolutely lose their minds. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow evening." I ended the secure call and placed the satellite phone down on the heavy glass table. I looked at my inner life. I needed a designer gown that screamed absolute power, something that would cut through the television screen and command total authority. I needed to arrange my personal security detail for the red carpet. And most importantly, I needed to initiate a complete, ruthless financial lockdown of every asset David mistakenly believed he owned before I stepped onto that stage. The ticking time bomb was officially armed. The countdown had just begun, and the devastating explosion scheduled for tomorrow night would be absolutely spectacular. I took one final sip of my vintage wine, savoring the taste of absolute impending victory. David had wanted me to be invisible. I was about to become the only thing he could see. I placed the satellite phone down and turned my attention back to my laptop. The glowing screen was my weapon and my fingers were ready to pull the trigger. I opened a direct, heavily encrypted video link to Geneva. Within 3 seconds, the face of my primary asset manager appeared on the screen. Victor was a financial architect who managed the hidden billions of the Origin Empire. He answered immediately, regardless of the significant time zone difference. "Good evening, founder." Victor said, his tone perfectly neutral and highly professional. "Victor, we are executing a complete financial lockdown on the Boston domestic accounts," I commanded. "Effective immediately with a hard public drop tomorrow evening." "Understood. Shall I initiate the Alpha Protocol?" "Yes. I want David completely severed from the Master Trust." For the last 5 years, David had operated under the delusion that he was the primary breadwinner of our household. I had set up our joint checking and savings accounts through a highly sophisticated banking structure. On paper, it looked like a standard joint account at a prestigious national bank. In reality, it was a superficial sub-account, funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars to cover his extravagant custom suits, his expensive client dinners, and his massive law school debt. "Cut off his access to the joint accounts," I instructed, my voice devoid of any warmth. "Drain the balances back into the primary corporate holding fund. Leave him with exactly what his legal paycheck deposited over the past 6 months, minus the personal expenses he already charged. That should leave him with an account balance hovering near zero." Victor typed rapidly. "Accounts are being drained now. The balances will reflect his actual legal deposits within 60 seconds. What about the credit lines?" "Cancel every single platinum card tied to my corporate guarantor," I said. "He has been using those specific cards to wine and dine his boss and buy expensive gifts for Isabella. I want all of them flagged as permanently closed. I want them to decline the very next time he tries to swipe them at a restaurant or a jewelry store." "Done," Victor confirmed, the keystrokes echoing sharply through the audio feed. "Moving on to the real estate assets, the Boston property." This was the absolute crown jewel of his arrogant deception. David loved to parade around the $1.5 million house, boasting loudly to his parents and Gregory Pierce about how his brilliant legal mind had secured such a prime piece of real estate. He had completely ignored the humiliating fact that his terrible credit score had nearly ruined the purchase. I had saved him by purchasing the property outright in cash through my anonymous trust, legally structuring the deed so that my corporate entity retained absolute ownership. I had allowed David to be listed merely as an authorized occupant, a legal technicality he deliberately ignored to feed his massive ego. "Revoke his authorized occupant status," I commanded, staring at the digital deed on my high-resolution monitor. "Transfer the property assignment. Indeed, transfer is locked," Victor stated smoothly. "He is now legally classified as a trespasser in that house. Shall I dispatch private security to execute an immediate eviction?" "Not yet," I replied, a cold, calculating smile forming on my lips. "I want him to host his grand Christmas Eve dinner. I want him to pour my expensive wine and brag to Gregory Pierce about his magnificent home. I want him flying at maximum altitude when the engine completely fails. Schedule the eviction enforcement for Christmas morning. Let the local police and my private security team handle the physical removal after the broadcast airs." Perfectly timed, founder. "Are there any other assets you wish to liquidate or repossess?" I thought about his leased luxury sports car parked in my driveway. "The vehicle he drives. The lease is guaranteed by my firm. Terminate the guarantee immediately. Let the dealership send a recovery team to repossess it." "It will be reported as an unsupported lease by tomorrow afternoon," Victor said. I leaned back against the plush velvet sofa, watching the confirmation prompts flashing rapidly across my screen in bright green text. Every single pillar of David's carefully constructed, arrogant life was being systematically dismantled with a few keystrokes. The financial security he took for granted, the luxurious lifestyle he used to attract Isabella, the impressive home he used to flex his superiority over his family and his colleagues, it was all vanishing into thin air. He had kicked me out of the house with a cheap prepaid card, fully believing he possessed all the power. He had mocked my simple clothes and my quiet late nights, entirely blind to the fact that those exact late nights were funding his entire existence. He thought I was weak. He thought I was dependent. By tomorrow night, David would realize he was nothing but a fragile paper king, sitting on a throne, not even own the roof over his head, and he would learn all of this while watching the woman he discarded accept the most prestigious business award in the country on live television. "Everything is locked and secured," Victor announced, pulling me from my thoughts. "He has zero access to your wealth. You are completely insulated." "Thank you, Victor. Keep the legal team on high alert for tomorrow night. I want them ready to crush any retaliatory lawsuits he attempts to file. We will bury him in paperwork before he even finds a lawyer willing to take his case," Victor promised, offering a rare, sharp smile. "Have a wonderful evening, Founder." The video feed cut out, plunging the suite back into quiet stillness. I closed the laptop and ran my hands over the cool silver casing. The financial execution was flawless. David was officially a broke, assetless fraud. He just did not know it yet. I stood up and walked over to the sprawling master bathroom, catching my reflection in the illuminated mirror. The tired, accommodating wife, who had quietly packed her bags in the freezing Boston house, was completely gone. The woman staring back at me was a ruthless billionaire chief executive officer preparing for absolute war. I picked up my hotel phone and dialed the concierge. "Yes, madam. How may I assist you?" the voice answered instantly. "I need your premier personal styling team in my suite at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning," I instructed firmly. "I need an evening gown fit for a national television broadcast. Something powerful, emerald green or deep sapphire, and I need a full security detail arranged for a red carpet arrival tomorrow evening." "It will be our absolute priority," the concierge replied seamlessly. I hung up the phone and looked out the window one last time. The snow was still falling heavily over the city, blanketing the streets in a pristine layer of white. Tomorrow the storm would finally break, and Dave perfectly still in the plush velvet chair of my hotel suite. My secure tablet rested on my lap, streaming the live high-definition security feed from the Boston house. It was Christmas Eve, and the grand performance I had so carefully orchestrated was finally underway. I watched the screen with a cold, predatory focus, ignoring the makeup artist applying a bold crimson color to my lips. At exactly 6 o'clock, a sleek black town car pulled into my snowy driveway. David practically sprinted to the front door, throwing it open with a wide, heavily practiced smile. Gregory Pierce stepped into the warm foyer, brushing snowflakes from his expensive cashmere overcoat. His elegant wife followed closely behind, handing her silk scarf to David. Isabella rushed forward, kissing her father on the cheek and linking her arm through David's. The picture of elite corporate harmony was absolutely sickening. David played the role of the wealthy, successful master of the house flawlessly. He ushered the Pierce family into the expansive living room where the massive stone fireplace crackled warmly. His mother and father stood up immediately, offering overly enthusiastic greetings, while his sister Diana beamed with sycophantic joy. Only Jamal remained seated in his corner chair, his expression tight, refusing to participate in the toxic charade. Jamal caught the camera's lens for a brief fraction of a second, his dark eyes narrowing in silent protest against the sickening display of wealth and deception. He knew the truth about the house, and he knew they were burying me alive to elevate David. Yet he honored my request, keeping his mouth shut and letting them dig their own graves. "Gregory, please make yourself comfortable," David announced, his voice echoing through the hidden microphone with sickening confidence. As David walked confidently down the hallway and disappeared down the stairs into the climate-controlled wine cellar, I knew exactly what he was looking for. A minute later, he returned holding a pristine bottle of Chateau Margaux. It was a vintage bottle I had personally sourced and purchased for $2,000 at a private charity auction 3 years ago to celebrate Origen hitting its first major valuation milestone. David had complained bitterly about the price back then, calling it a ridiculous waste of money for a hobby. Now he handled the bottle with extreme reverence, presenting it to Gregory as if he had imported it himself. An exquisite choice, David Gregory noted, examining the label with an approving nod. You certainly know how to curate a fine collection. I pride myself on selecting only the absolute best, David replied smoothly, pouring the rich red liquid into imported crystal glasses. I believe that surrounding yourself with quality is the only way to ensure ultimate success. The group moved to the formal dining room, sitting around the long mahogany table I had custom ordered from Italy. The crystal chandelier cast a warm, inviting glow over the elaborate holiday feast David's mother had prepared. Gregory took a slow sip of the expensive wine and looked around the room, his eyes scanning the high coffered ceilings and the intricate crown molding. I must say, David, this property is truly magnificent, Gregory stated, setting his glass down onto the table. Boston real estate is notoriously brutal right now. Securing a $1.5 million home at your age is a massive accomplishment. It shows exceptional financial acumen. David leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine with a look of profound arrogance. He did not flinch. He did not hesitate. He simply absorbed the praise for a massive financial sacrifice he had absolutely nothing to do with. Tremendous amount of hard work and late nights at the firm, but I knew I needed a home that reflected my ultimate ambitions. I view this house as the foundational bedrock of my legacy. A man's home dictates his status in the world, and I refuse to settle for anything less than elite. I gripped the hard edges of my tablet, watching his parents nod in vigorous agreement. They were entirely complicit in his towering delusion. Gregory wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and leaned forward, his expression turning slightly more serious. Speaking of your foundation, David, we need to address the elephant in the room. Isabella mentioned your current domestic situation. As you know, Pearson Associates represents the highest moral and social caliber. A messy marital dispute is bad for business, especially when we are actively courting a $2 billion account like Origen. The anonymous founder of that company demands absolute ethical perfection from their legal counsel. The irony was so incredibly thick, it practically radiated through the digital screen. Gregory was demanding ethical perfection from a man sitting in a stolen house alongside his mistress while actively insulting the very billionaire they were trying to court. Gregory continued, his voice echoing through the silent hotel suite where I sat surrounded by my actual wealth. We cannot afford any scandals, David. Origen is the golden goose. If they catch wind of any instability, they will drop our firm instantly. David set his wine glass down, his face twisting into a mask of solemn responsibility. You have my absolute assurance, Gregory, that the situation is entirely resolved, David said smoothly. My current wife is completely out of the picture. She was quite frankly a massive dead weight holding me back from reaching my full potential. She lacked the sophistication, the drive, and the elite mindset required. Nora just did not understand the corporate world, Dad, Isabella chimed in. David carried the entire financial and emotional burden of that marriage. He was suffocating. He finally asked her to leave yesterday and she packed her cheap bags without a single argument. She knows she does not belong in this house. I am filing the final divorce papers the morning after Christmas. David confirmed, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. I am purging the dead weight from my life, so I can fully focus on the firm, on the Origen account, and on building a future with someone who truly matches my ambition. He turned his head and smiled lovingly at Isabella. Gregory looked from his daughter to David. The older executive sat back in his chair, interlacing his fingers. The tension in the room hung heavily for a few seconds before Gregory finally offered a slow, deeply approving smile. Ambition requires ruthless decisions, David Gregory announced, raising his glass of my stolen wine. I am glad to see you have the backbone to cut loose a liability. Isabella deserves a man who commands his own empire. Secure this divorce quietly. Bring me the Origen account by New Year, and the managing partner office is yours. The table erupted in joyful cheers. David's mother clapped her hands together in delight, while his sister Diana raised her glass high. They toasted to David's brilliant future, his magnificent home, and his beautiful new partner. They were celebrating their absolute victory, completely blind to the fact that they were dancing on a landmine with the timer counting down to 0. I watched them clink their crystal glasses together, the sharp sound ringing out like a death knell for his entire career. My makeup artist stepped back, admiring her flawless work in the mirror. I locked the tablet screen, my heart beating with the steady, calm rhythm of a predator. It was time to give David exactly what he asked for. It was time to show him how the real world operated. The heavy oak doors of the hotel suite closed behind my styling team, leaving me alone in the sprawling room for a brief moment. I smoothed the rich emerald fabric of my custom gown, feeling the heavy drape of the silk against my skin. A delicate diamond necklace rested coolly against my collarbone, a subtle but undeniable marker of the immense wealth I wielded. I glanced at the security feed on my tablet one last time before slipping the device into my evening clutch. The camera displayed the dining room of the Boston house where plates were being cleared and the conversation was taking a sharp, aggressive turn toward the corporate battlefield. I stepped out of the suite and walked toward the private elevator, knowing the countdown to absolute destruction had reached its final minutes. Inside the Boston house, the decadent holiday dinner had concluded, leaving the table cluttered with empty plates and nearly drained wine glasses. Gregory Pierce leaned back in his chair, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin before tossing it onto the mahogany table. The casual, celebratory atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Gregory was no longer the approving father-in-law. He seamlessly transitioned into the ruthless chief executive officer, his sharp eyes locking directly onto my husband. "We have celebrated your domestic restructuring enough for one evening," David Gregory announced, his voice dropping into a serious, commanding register. "It is time to discuss the only thing that truly matters right now. The Origen initial public offering." David immediately sat up straighter, abandoning his relaxed posture. He nodded eagerly, mimicking the intense focus of a loyal soldier receiving his marching orders. His mother and father fell completely silent, resting his elbows on the table. Origen is a biomedical juggernaut. They are completely rewriting the rules of diagnostic healthcare with predictive algorithms. The market valuation is hovering around $2 billion, but the whisper numbers suggest it will open significantly higher. Securing the legal representation for this offering will cement Pierce and Associates as the absolute dominant force on the Eastern Seaboard for the next 20 years. The billable hours alone will fund our expansion into international markets. David swallowed hard, the sheer magnitude of the deal clearly weighing on him. "I assure you, Gregory, I have my entire team working through the holiday," David promised, his voice tight with desperation. "We are refining the pitch deck hourly. I am personally reviewing every single contract contingency to ensure our proposal is absolutely bulletproof. I will not let this slip through our fingers." Gregory stared at him coldly. "You cannot afford to let it slip, David. The competition is rabid. Every massive corporate law firm in the country is actively begging for a seat at this table. The proxy board managing Origen has been completely impenetrable. They operate like a shadow government, but the ultimate decision rests entirely with the anonymous founder. Whoever this genius is, they hold absolute power over our future. If you want that corner office and the managing partner title, you have to convince this billionaire that you are the only attorney ruthless and brilliant enough to handle their empire." Isabella reached over and squeezed David's hand. "You can do this, David," she encouraged softly. "You are the sharpest legal mind at the firm." Gregory suddenly pulled back his sleeve, checking the face of his heavy platinum watch. He stood up from the dining table, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Enough talking about strategy," Gregory commanded, gesturing toward the expansive living room. "David, go turn on the television. Put it on the CNBC," eager to obey the sudden directive. "Of course. Is there breaking news regarding the market?" Gregory offered a rare shark-like smile. "There is going to be historic news tonight. The organizers of the Tech and Business Innovator of the Year awards contacted my office earlier today. They tipped off their premium corporate sponsors about a massive shift in their programming. The anonymous founder and chief executive officer of Origin is finally stepping out of the shadows. She is attending the gala in person tonight to accept the grand prize on live national television. A collective gasp echoed through the dining room. David's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. The elusive billionaire, the phantom figure he had been obsessing over for months, was about to reveal herself to the entire world. David rushed into the living room, grabbing the remote control and pointing it frantically at the massive 85-inch flat-screen television mounted above the stone fireplace. He switched the input tuning directly to the live broadcast of the Elite Business Gala. The screen illuminated the dark room with flashing graphics and the loud, energetic voices of financial commentators discussing the unprecedented event. Gregory walked slowly into the living room, his hands clasped behind his back, staring intently at the bright screen. His wife followed, taking a seat on the plush sofa next to Isabella. David's parents hurried in right behind them, holding their wine glasses, their faces flushed with excitement at being included in such a high-stakes corporate moment. Diana grabbed a spot on the matching love seat, her eyes glued to the television. Only Jamal hung back, leaning against the archway connecting the kitchen to the living room. His arms remained crossed, his expression skeptical as he watched the bizarre, greedy worship of wealth unfold. "I want you to study this woman. Watch how she speaks. Watch how she handles the intense media pressure. Watch her posture and her absolute command of the room. If you are going to pitch her your legal services next week, you need to understand her psychology. You need to learn how real untouchable billionaires operate. They do not tolerate weakness, and they do not suffer fools." "I understand completely, Gregory," David replied, standing at strict attention near the edge of the fireplace. "I will analyze every single word she says. I will find out exactly what she values, and I will tailor our entire approach to match her elite mindset." His parents beamed with pride, watching their son strategize with a titan of industry. They all settled comfortably into the luxurious furniture I had purchased with my secret fortune. They took slow sips of my expensive vintage wine, completely entranced by the flashing lights of the television broadcast. They sat in my house, drinking my wine, breathing my air, all while eagerly preparing to worship the very ground I walked on. They were leaning forward in their seats, their eyes wide with hungry anticipation, completely oblivious to the fact that the anonymous billionaire they were so desperate to impress was the exact same woman they had just thrown out into the freezing snow like garbage. The trap was officially sprung, and the steel jaws were about to snap shut. The elevator doors closed, sealing me inside the mirrored cabin. The woman staring back was unrecognizable from the exhausted wife who packed a duffel bag yesterday. My styling team executed my vision perfectly. I wore a custom emerald silk gown that clung to my frame like armor. The rich green fabric gathered at my waist and flowed into a dramatic train, exuding unadulterated authority. Hair was pulled into a sleek style, highlighting the predatory focus burning in my eyes. I was no longer hiding. I was stepping into the light, armed to ruin the man who discarded me. Miles away, inside the warm living room of my Boston home, David leaned forward on the plush sofa. The CNBC broadcast blared from the television, filling the room with the frantic voices of financial analysts. The screen flashed a massive graphic featuring the Origin corporate logo, accompanied by a ticking countdown clock. Gregory Pierce stood nearby, his arms crossed tightly, his eyes locked on the glowing numbers. David grabbed Isabella by the hand, squeezing it affectionately while projecting absolute confidence. He turned to his boss with arrogant certainty. "I have been studying this company for months," Gregory David boasted loudly, ensuring his parents heard every word. Whoever this female billionaire is, she clearly values aggressive strategy. She kept her identity hidden to control the narrative. That shows a ruthless mindset. When we pitch our services next week, I will mirror her exact energy. I will show her Pierce and Associates is the only firm capable of matching her intellectual dominance. I know how to handle women like her. They want a man who can take charge. His mother nodded enthusiastically from the love seat, taking another sip of my vintage wine. You always had a gift for commanding attention, David, she praised. That is why you are destined for the managing partner office. You are a natural leader. Thank goodness you cleared out that awful distraction from your life. Could you imagine trying to host this brilliant billionaire with Nora moping around in the background? She could barely manage a simple conversation without looking lost. She would have humiliated our entire family. Isabella laughed, her high giggle echoing through the living room. Nora would probably offer the chief executive officer a coupon for a discount grocery store. Baby. Now you can focus entirely on your elite future. I stepped out of the elevator into the grand lobby. A team of security contractors immediately flanked me. The hotel manager rushed forward, clearing a path through the opulent foyer. Wealthy guests stopped their conversations, turning to stare at the stunning woman surrounded by bodyguards. I did not break my stride. I walked with lethal grace, the heavy emerald silk whispering softly against the polished marble floor. My security chief pulled open the glass doors, and the freezing Boston wind hit my face. It felt exhilarating. A black stretch limousine sat idling at the curb. The chauffeur bowed slightly, holding the door wide open for my arrival. Back in the suburbs, Jamal shifted his weight in the corner chair. He watched David puff out his chest and accept the lavish praise from his ignorant family. Jamal discreetly checked his phone before looking back at the television. The financial pundits were practically screaming with anticipation, analyzing the unprecedented rise of Origin and the sheer genius of its anonymous founder. Jamal looked at David, then looked at the television, his face completely devoid of amusement. The suffocating irony in the room was physically repulsive to him. He knew David was celebrating a fraudulent victory, basking in the glow of a house he did not own, drinking wine he did not buy, and preparing to court a billionaire he could never impress. I slid into the luxurious, heated interior of the black limousine. The soft leather seats enveloped me, and the tinted windows shielded me from the snowy city streets. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing me inside a rolling fortress. I reached for the chilled bottle of sparkling water resting in the crystal console, pouring myself a glass with perfectly steady hands. The vehicle smoothly pulled away from the curb, merging into the heavy holiday. I pulled it out and tapped the screen. A final message from Victor, my lead asset manager in Geneva, illuminated the dark interior of the limousine. The lockdown is absolute. All accounts are frozen. The deed is secured. He stands on thin air. I smiled, locking the tablet and sliding it back into my bag. The contrast between my current reality and David's arrogant ignorance was intoxicating. He was sitting in my living room proudly wearing a custom suit I covertly financed, boasting to his boss about his superior intellect. He genuinely believed he engineered the ultimate life upgrade. He thought his path to wealth and power was entirely cleared. He was gleefully watching a television screen, eagerly waiting to analyze his future client, completely unaware that he was waiting to witness his own execution. The long limousine glided through snowy streets, bringing me closer to the glittering gala. I stared out the tinted window, watching the city lights blur into bright streaks of color. I felt a profound calm wash over my entire body. I spent 5 agonizing years quietly absorbing their insults, tolerating their disrespect, and financially subsidizing their arrogant illusions. I allowed David to convince himself he was a titan of industry, while I operated the actual corporate machinery in total secrecy. But the era of my silent accommodation was officially over. I was about to shatter his reality with a public devastation he could never comprehend. The stage was set, the cameras were live, and my wrath was inbound. The black limousine rolled to a smooth stop in front of the Grand Convention Center. Through the tinted glass, I saw a blinding sea of flashing camera lights and a surging crowd of journalists. The red carpet stretched out like a velvet runway, flanked by heavy velvet ropes, and dozens of uniformed police officers struggling to hold back the frantic media. Anonymous billionaire stepping out of the vehicle. My lead security contractor opened the door. The freezing winter air rushed in, mixing with the deafening roar of the crowd. I stepped out onto the red carpet. My emerald gown caught the brilliant glare of 100 flashbulbs shimmering like liquid glass. The reporters instantly surged forward against the barricade, screaming questions about the impending initial public offering and demanding to know my name. I ignored every single one of them. I did not pause to pose for photographs or offer polite smiles to the television cameras. I kept my posture rigid and my gaze fixed straight ahead. My security detail formed a tight, impenetrable wedge around me, moving with military precision to slice through the chaotic frenzy. We bypassed the main press area, entirely walking swiftly past the bewildered celebrities and corporate titans who had stopped to give interviews. I moved directly toward the heavily guarded side entrance reserved exclusively for elite guests. The massive steel doors slammed shut behind me, instantly cutting off the deafening roar of the paparazzi. The backstage area was a hive of frantic, highly organized activity. Men and women with clipboards ran down the dimly lit corridors, shouting timing cues into their headsets. Harrison Caldwell stood near the edge of the velvet curtains, surrounded by network executives. When he saw me approach, his anxious expression transformed into a look of absolute awe. He stepped forward, taking in my commanding presence, completely captivated by the ruthless energy I projected. He extended his hand, treating me with the profound reverence reserved only for the highest echelon of the global elite. He whispered that the network ratings were currently shattering all previous records. The entire world was watching, and the stage was perfectly set. Miles away in the quiet suburbs of Boston, the atmosphere inside my stolen house was thick with greedy anticipation. The massive television screen above the stone fireplace flashed with brilliant golden graphics, signaling the return from a commercial break. A famous financial journalist stepped up to the crystal podium, the bright stage lights reflecting off his polished suit. The audience inside the auditorium erupted into thunderous applause, anticipating the historic revelation. Gregory Pierce leaned forward on the plush sofa, resting his elbows heavily on his knees. He raised a hand, commanding absolute silence from the room. "Quiet down, everyone." Gregory ordered, his voice sharp and utterly focused. "The main event is starting. David, grab your notepad. I want you analyzing her body language from the exact second she steps onto that stage." David eagerly grabbed a leather-bound notebook from the coffee table, his eyes locked onto the screen with a manic, hungry intensity. He sat on the edge of the armchair, puffing out his chest completely, ready to dissect the psychology of the brilliant billionaire he planned to manipulate. Isabella sat closely beside him, swirling her expensive wine, a smug smile plastered across her face. David's parents leaned in closely from the love seat, their faces flushed with the thrill of proximity to such massive wealth. They were eagerly drinking my vintage wine, sitting in the luxurious comfort of my home, totally convinced that their brilliant son was about to secure the ultimate corporate victory. Diana sat next to her mother, completely mesmerized by the flashing television graphics, while her husband Jamal remained silently in his corner chair, his dark eyes watching the bizarre spectacle with quiet, intense scrutiny. On the television, the host raised his hands to quiet the cheering crowd. His voice boomed through the high-definition speakers in my living room, commanding the attention of millions of viewers across the country. "Tonight we are making corporate history," the host announced, his tone ringing with dramatic flair. "For 5 years, the biomedical industry has been completely revolutionized by a single powerful entity. Origen has shattered every expectation, developing predictive algorithms that are actively saving countless lives. The technology is brilliant. The valuation is a staggering $2 billion. But the genius behind the machine has remained a total mystery, choosing to operate entirely in the shadows." David nodded aggressively at the screen, tapping his pen against the notebook. "That is exactly what I plan to capitalize on," Gregory David bragged loudly. "She is highly secretive, which means she values extreme discretion and aggressive loyalty. I will pitch our firm as her ultimate fortress. I will convince her that I am the only attorney ruthless enough to protect her empire. I know exactly how to handle women who think they are the smartest person in the room." Gregory smiled approvingly, taking another slow sip of his wine. "Just remember, David, she is not a standard client. She is a titan, Do not underestimate her intelligence, but make sure you establish your absolute dominance during the pitch. You need to control the room. I will own the room. Gregory David promised, his arrogance blinding him to reality. By next week, she will be eating out of the palm of my hand. On the television, the host slowly pulled a heavy golden envelope from the podium. The auditorium fell into a tense silence, mirroring the breathless anticipation filling my living room. Tonight, the long shadows finally disappear. The host declared, loudly tearing open the seal. Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the main stage right now. It is my absolute honor to present the grand prize to the brilliant secretly purchased. Please welcome the brilliant mind behind Origin, our innovator of the year, Nora. The television camera panned swiftly across the sea of standing ovations, cutting through the crowded, glittering auditorium before locking directly onto me. The intense spotlight hit me like a physical force, but I did not flinch. I stepped out from the heavy velvet curtains, the rich emerald silk of my custom-tailored gown flowing flawlessly around my silhouette. The heavy diamond necklace sparkled under the harsh stage lights with a cold, unforgiving brilliance. I kept my head held high, my posture radiating an absolute terrifying authority. I walked slowly up the carpeted steps toward the crystal podium, completely ignoring the frantic applause echoing through the massive venue. I looked like a queen ascending her rightful throne, projecting a ruthless grace that left the entire corporate world utterly mesmerized. Inside the Boston house, the festive, arrogant atmosphere died instantly. The transition from smug anticipation to absolute suffocating terror took less than a single second. Total deafening silence descended upon the living room. The only sound remaining was the roaring cheer of the crowd emanating from the television screen. David's mother, who had been balancing a small porcelain appetizer plate on her lap, let out a sharp, breathless gasp. Her hands went completely slack. The expensive porcelain slipped from her fingers and crashed onto the polished hardwood floor. The loud, violent sound of shattering porcelain echoed through the frozen room, sending sharp white shards flying across the expensive rug. But nobody looked down at the mess. Every single pair of eyes remained glued to the massive television screen in sheer, unadulterated horror. David stopped breathing. He was sitting on the very edge of the armchair, his leather-bound notebook resting eagerly on his knee. When my face filled the massive screen in perfect, undeniable clarity, his entire body went completely rigid. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. He stood up so fast and with such violent force that the heavy armchair tipped backward and crashed heavily onto the floor behind him. His hand began to tremble uncontrollably. The crystal wine glass he was holding, filled with the $2,000 vintage wine I had carefully collected, slipped right through his numb fingers. The glass hit the hardwood floor and exploded into countless jagged pieces. The dark red liquid splashed violently across his custom-tailored trousers and pooled on the pristine wood, looking exactly like fresh blood spreading across a battlefield. "No!" David stammered, his voice barely a choked, breathless whisper. He took a stumbling step closer to the television, his eyes wide and manic, desperately searching the glowing screen for some hidden sign that this was an elaborate, cruel hoax. "No, that is impossible." He stared at the screen, his mind completely failing to process the reality unfolding before his eyes. He was looking directly at the woman he had viciously degraded for 5 years. He was staring at the woman he had banished to a cheap motel with a $500 prepaid card just 24 hours ago. He had spent his entire marriage calling me a worthless freeloader, a dead weight, and an embarrassing liability who played on a computer in the spare bedroom. He had confidently promised Gregory Pierce that he was divorcing me to upgrade his life and secure his elite status. Now he was watching me stand at the absolute pinnacle of global corporate power, holding the massive keys to the $2 billion empire his prestigious law firm was desperately begging to represent. The quiet woman he thought he had permanently crushed was actually a billionaire titan. Isabella Pierce sat frozen on the sofa, her hand covering her open mouth. The smug, arrogant smirk she had worn all evening had been wiped away entirely. She looked from the television screen to David, her dark eyes wide with sudden panic and profound confusion. She had enthusiastically supported David throwing me out into the snow, fully believing I was a pathetic loser who did not belong in this luxury estate. Now she was realizing she was sitting in a house owned by the very billionaire her powerful father was desperately trying to court. Gregory Pierce stood perfectly still, his glass of wine suspended halfway to his mouth. The powerful managing partner who had just spent the last hour praising David for ruthlessly cutting ties with a worthless wife looked absolutely paralyzed. His sharp executive mind was rapidly calculating the catastrophic implications of what was happening on the television broadcast. He slowly turned his head to look at David. The expression on Gregory's face morphed from initial shock into a dark, terrifying rage. He realized instantly that his ambitious senior attorney had not just lied about his domestic financial situation. David had actively insulted and humiliated the anonymous founder of Origin on the very eve of their massive corporate pitch. David's father sat completely paralyzed on the love seat, his face turning an unhealthy shade of purple. He had spent years lecturing me about my lack of ambition, proudly telling his country club friends that his son was the sole provider, burdened by an inadequate wife. The realization that I possessed a massive fortune, capable of buying his entire social circle, was actively short-circuiting his brain. Diana sat next to him, her mouth opening and closing silently as she stared at my emerald gown and the heavy diamonds resting against my skin. In the corner of the room, Jamal's slow, knowing smile touched the corners of his mouth. He did not say a word, simply letting the deafening silence and the sound of the cheering television crowd punish the arrogant people who had constantly mocked me. He knew exactly what was happening. The predator had finally stepped out of the shadows, and the slaughter had officially begun. On the screen, I reached the crystal podium. I placed my hands firmly on the edges of the stand and looked directly into the camera lens. I knew David was standing in my living room, staring at my face, completely drowning in a sea of his own shattered arrogance. I let a sharp, confident smile cross my lips. I was not going to run. I was not going to hide. I was about to speak, and every single word I said was going to dismantle his life brick by brick. The sheer psychological terror radiating through the Boston house was palpable. David was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, suffocating under the crushing weight of his monumental ignorance. The applause in the auditorium slowly died down, leaving only the sharp electric tension of a world waiting for the chief executive officer of Origin to finally speak. The camera zoomed in on my face, broadcasting my unbothered, lethal composure to millions of viewers, including the terrified man I had once promised to love. I adjusted the microphone with a calm, deliberate motion. I did not need notes. I did not need a teleprompter. I had spent years analyzing data, calculating risks, and predicting outcomes. I had predicted this exact moment with absolute precision. David watched my steady hands on the podium. Those were the same hands that had cooked his meals, organized his files, and covertly paid his mortgage. His breath hitched audibly in the quiet living room. He raised a shaking hand to his mouth, frantically trying to process the magnitude of his fatal error. He had desperately wanted an elite woman to stand by his side. He had wanted a ruthless high society player who understood the brutal nature of the corporate world. He had completely failed to realize he was already married to the most ruthless player in the game. David stood trembling among the broken glass and spilled wine, utterly powerless to stop the incoming wrath. The heavy silence in my living room pressed down on him as the television camera maintained a tight, unforgiving focus on my face. I looked out at the thousands of brilliant minds seated in the auditorium. I grasped the edges of the crystal podium and let a sharp, predatory smile curve my lips. "Good evening," I began. My voice was steady, calm, and echoed with absolute authority across the national broadcast. For 5 years, I have operated entirely in the shadows. I built Origin with a singular, unyielding vision to revolutionize predictive healthcare through artificial intelligence. I preferred the quiet sanctuary of my workspace to the glaring lights of high society. Many people mistook that silence for weakness. They assumed a lack of public bravado meant a lack of ambition. They were fatally wrong. In the Boston living room, every syllable I spoke landed like a physical blow. The air in the room grew completely stagnant. Gregory Pierce stopped breathing. His sharp, calculating mind rapidly processed the undeniable truth echoing from the television speakers. The elegant, commanding billionaire delivering this flawless corporate address was the exact same woman David had spent the last 2 hours actively trashing. Gregory turned his head very slowly. His eyes locked directly onto David. The mixture of absolute horror and dawning realization on the older executive's face was terrifying to behold. The blood rushed to Gregory's face as the pieces violently clicked together. He recognized that the $2 billion account his entire law firm was desperately fighting to secure belonged solely to the woman his senior attorney had just banished to a cheap motel. David had just bragged about divorcing the golden goose. He had publicly insulted the most powerful potential client in their firm's history. On the screen, I continued my speech, my voice carrying the immense weight of a multi-billion-dollar empire. We started as a quiet algorithm processing genetic markers on a single laptop I stated holding the attention of millions. Today, Origen holds a market valuation of $2 billion. Our technology is deployed in elite research hospitals across the globe. We have saved countless lives, and we have fundamentally shifted the paradigm of modern medicine. And as the financial world already knows, we are actively preparing for our initial public offering. We are about to open our doors to the global market. The interest from the absolute highest tiers of the legal and financial sectors has been incredibly humbling. We have received aggressive pitches from the most prestigious firms in the country, all eager to guide us through this monumental transition. David's mother shrank back deep into the plush sofa cushions. Her hands began to tremble violently. The woman she had aggressively labeled a freeloader, a dead weight, and a pathetic failure was casually confirming a $2 billion valuation on live national television. The sheer magnitude of my wealth hit the living room with crushing, suffocating force. All the passive-aggressive insults, all the condescending remarks about my simple clothes, all the cruel jokes about my lack of a real career rushed back to haunt her in vivid detail. David's father looked physically ill. He grasped his chest, his face pale and slick with sudden sweat, as his entire arrogance swallowed the bitter reality that his son was nothing but a fragile parasite feeding off a secret billionaire. Diana sat completely frozen beside him, her previous malicious joy instantly replaced by a deep, sickening dread. Isabella stared at the television screen, her mind completely failing to comprehend the unfolding disaster. She looked down at her expensive designer handbag resting on the floor, then looked around the grand living room. The magnificent house she was sitting in, the vintage wine she had been drinking, the luxurious lifestyle she desperately coveted, they were all funded by the woman she had just openly mocked. Isabella realized with sudden, terrifying clarity that David did not own a single piece of this elite existence. He was a complete fraud, and she had attached herself to a sinking ship. David could not move. His legs felt like heavy lead blocks rooted to the stained hardwood floor. He wanted to speak. He wanted to offer some desperate, frantic explanation to Gregory to somehow salvage the catastrophic wreckage of his career. But his throat was completely paralyzed. The arrogant, smooth-talking lawyer, who always had the perfect manipulative argument, was suddenly reduced to a trembling, silent coward. He stared at my radiant, powerful image on the screen, completely trapped in a nightmare of his own arrogant creation. Jamal leaned forward in his accent chair. His eyes remained fixed on the television screen, thoroughly enjoying the spectacular destruction of the people who had treated me like garbage. He did not offer a single word of comfort to his terrified in-laws. He simply watched the execution unfold, silently applauding the ruthless trap I had so perfectly sprung. I stood on the stage, the heavy golden trophy resting next to my hand on the crystal podium. The auditorium was completely silent, hanging on every word I spoke. I had established my power. I had confirmed the staggering value of my company. I had laid the groundwork perfectly. The executives in the crowd were nodding in deep respect, taking notes on my corporate philosophy. They saw a brilliant innovator ready to conquer the market. But my speech was not meant for the thousands of people sitting in the audience. It was meticulously designed for the small group of arrogant, toxic people sitting in my living room. I took a slow, steady breath. It was time to shift the focus of my address. It was time to aim the heavy artillery directly at Pierce and Associates and pull the trigger on live national television. I looked straight into the primary camera lens, my eyes burning with cold, calculated vengeance, ready to deliver the final fatal blow. The massive auditorium was completely captivated. Thousands of industry leaders, venture capitalists, and financial journalists hung on my every breath. I adjusted my grip on the edges of the crystal podium. I let the silence stretch for just a fraction of a second longer, ensuring that every single viewer across the nation was paying absolute attention. I could feel the immense weight of the past 5 years lifting from my shoulders. All the quiet indignities, the muffled insults, and the arrogant dismissals from David and his toxic family were evaporating under the glaring heat of the stage lights. I was finally taking my power back, and I was doing it with maximum collateral damage. As we prepare to take Origin public, I announced, my voice slicing through the quiet room with razor-sharp clarity. We have been evaluating the partnerships that will guide us into this next chapter. An initial public offering of this magnitude requires more than just aggressive legal maneuvering. It requires an alignment of principles. When I founded this company, I built it on a foundation of absolute transparency, unwavering ethics, and relentless integrity. Those are not just corporate buzzwords for a pitch deck. They are the strict non-negotiable requirements for anyone who wishes to sit at our table. In the Boston living room, David stopped breathing entirely. The color had already drained from his face, but now his hands began to shake violently. He knew exactly what was happening. He recognized the heavy impending doom rolling toward him like a runaway freight train. His heart hammered furiously against his ribs, a physical manifestation of his complete and utter panic. Gregory Pierce stood paralyzed, the blood roaring in his ears. The wealthy managing partner was suddenly trapped in a horrifying front-row seat to his own professional slaughter. Over the past 8 months, my proxy board has received countless bids from the most elite corporate law firms in the country. I continued projecting a devastating calm. They have offered us the moon. They have promised round-the-clock dedication. They have touted their most brilliant senior attorneys to secure our $2 billion account. We have reviewed every single proposal meticulously. I paused, letting a cold, humorless smile touch my lips. I looked dead into the camera lens, stripping away the corporate facade to deliver a direct, highly personal execution. Transparency and ethics are our core values, I announced to millions of viewers, which is why Origin is officially publicly rejecting the bid from Pierce and Associates. A collective, deafening gasp erupted across the grand auditorium. The financial journalists in the press pit immediately started frantically typing on their devices. Network executives scrambled behind the velvet curtains. Publicly rejecting a major firm on live national television during an award broadcast was entirely unprecedented. It was a brutal, catastrophic blow to the firm's reputation. The shockwave would ripple through Wall Street by morning, causing clients to question the integrity of the disgraced law firm. But I was not finished. I raised my voice just enough to cut through the rising murmur of the shocked crowd, declared, driving the final nail directly into his coffin. A man currently committing financial fraud, lying about his personal assets, and bringing his mistress into a home entirely bought and paid for by his wife right on Christmas Eve. The camera zoomed in on my face, broadcasting my absolute disdain to the entire world. I let a sharp, terrifying smirk cross my face. Merry Christmas, David. The auditorium exploded into absolute chaos. The polite, formal atmosphere of the elite business gala vanished in a fraction of a second. Thousands of attendees gasped in shock, whispering frantically to one another. Reporters shouted questions, their voices echoing through the massive hall. My security detail immediately stepped forward, creating a protective wall around the podium as the sheer magnitude of the public execution sent shockwaves through the entire financial industry. Phones were ringing globally. Social media was already detonating with the clip. Miles away inside the lavishly decorated living room of my Boston home, the psychological devastation was absolute. The heavy silence following my broadcasted words was suffocating. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, and completely poisonous. David stood rooted to the hardwood floor, surrounded by the shattered glass and the spreading pool of my ruined vintage wine. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just been struck by lightning. His entire meticulously crafted reality, his arrogant superiority, his fake wealth, and his impending promotion had just been incinerated in front of his boss and his family. The life he thought he manipulated perfectly was gone. Isabella let out a sharp, terrified whimper. She scrambled backward on the plush sofa, pulling her expensive fur coat tightly around her shoulders, as if trying to shield herself from the blast radius. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, landing on the luxurious furniture, the high ceilings, and the custom dining table. The horrifying truth crashed down on her. Nothing in this house belonged to the man she was sleeping with. She had attached herself to a penniless fraud. Furthermore, as the daughter of Gregory Pierce, she realized she was the mistress mentioned on national television. Her socialite reputation was permanently ruined. David's mother buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud, miserable sob. The crushing humiliation of the moment completely broke her arrogant facade. She had spent years mocking my simple clothes and my quiet demeanor, bragging to her wealthy friends about her highly successful son. Now every single person in her elite country club circle was watching her son be exposed as a cheating, financially dependent parasite. His father sat completely immobilized, his jaw hanging open, utterly unable to process the total annihilation of his family's reputation. He grabbed his chest, his breathing shallow and rapid. Diana sat frozen, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. Jamal remained in his accent chair. He slowly raised his hands and began a slow, quiet, sarcastic clap. The soft sound of his applause cut through the heavy terror in the room, highlighting the sheer brilliance of the trap they had all willingly walked into. He had tried to warn them about their toxic behavior, and now he was watching karma deliver a flawless victory. But the most terrifying reaction came from Gregory Pierce. The powerful managing partner stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on the television screen, where financial commentators were already scrambling to analyze my unprecedented statement. The ticker at the bottom of the screen was flashing breaking news alerts regarding the severe reputational damage to Pierce and Associates. Gregory's face turned a violent, dangerous shade of crimson. The veins in his neck bulged against his starched white collar. His entire law firm, a prestigious institution he had spent decades building, had just been publicly humiliated and blacklisted by the most lucrative client of the decade. Worse still, his own daughter had been implicated as the mistress in a highly publicized scandal. And it was all because of the arrogant, foolish senior attorney standing right in front of him. Gregory slowly turned his head away from the television. His dark, furious eyes locked onto David. The room temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. The execution on television was over, but the physical bloodbath inside the living room was just about to begin. Gregory Pierce moved. He charged forward like a furious bull. The distance disappeared in two massive strides. Before David could raise his hands, Gregory swung his arm back and delivered a vicious slap directly across David's face. The sharp cracking sound echoed like a gunshot, causing his mother to shriek and bury her face in her hands. David staggered backward. His cheek instantly turned a violent shade of red. He clutched his face wide with absolute terror. Gregory lunged forward and grabbed David by the collar of his expensive cashmere sweater, hauling him forward until they were inches apart. "You absolute idiot!" Gregory roared, spit flying from his lips. "You arrogant, incompetent fool. You just destroyed my entire firm on national television." "Gregory, please, I can explain," David stammered desperately, trying to pry his boss's hands off his sweater. "I had no idea it was her." "You did not know," Gregory screamed, pushing David backwards so hard he crashed heavily into the glass coffee table. "You told me she was a pathetic liability. You brought my daughter into a luxury house paid for by a billionaire chief executive officer and bragged of shattered glass across the hardwood floor. The Origin account is gone. Every major client we currently have will see this broadcast and pull their business by tomorrow morning. Nobody wants a legal team associated with fraud and a highly publicized domestic scandal. You made us look like a complete joke. David scrambled to his feet, holding his hands up in surrender. We can fix this, Gregory. I will call her right now. I will make a public apology. I will tell the press she is having a mental breakdown. We can spin the narrative. Gregory let out a dark, terrifying laugh that chilled the room. You genuinely think a woman who just publicly executed you on live television is going to answer your call? You are completely delusional. Gregory pointed a shaking, furious finger directly at David's chest. You are fired. Effective immediately. You are stripped of your title, your salary, and your corporate standing. You will never practice law in this city again. I will personally make sure you are disbarred for financial fraud. David looked as though the floor had completely vanished beneath him. His knees buckled. Gregory, you cannot do this. I gave you everything. You dedicated your life to your own massive ego. Gregory spat coldly. Hand over your corporate phone and your access badge right now. David fumbled in his pockets, pulling out the heavy company phone and the plastic security badge. He handed them over with trembling fingers. Gregory snatched them away and turned sharply toward his daughter. Isabella, get your coat, Gregory commanded. We are leaving this stolen property right now. Isabella stood up slowly from the plush sofa. The romantic affection she had displayed all evening was entirely gone, replaced by utter disgust. Looking at David now, she saw nothing but a humiliated, unemployed fraud standing in a puddle of spilled wine. He did not own the luxury mansion. He did not possess a multi-million-dollar bank account. He was entirely dependent on the woman they had spent the evening mocking. Her own socialite reputation was permanently ruined, branded as a homewrecker who trespassed into a billionaire's home. Isabella, David pleaded, taking a desperate step toward her. Please do not go. We can figure this out. I love you. Isabella let out a sharp, cruel scoff. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out the expensive diamond promise ring David had given her just a week ago. Figure what out exactly? Isabella demanded, her voice dripping with pure venom. Are we going to figure out how to live in a cardboard box? You lied to me. You told me you bought this luxury estate. You are nothing but a cheap parasite who got caught trying to play in a league you do not belong in. She threw the heavy diamond ring directly at his chest. The jewelry bounced off his sweater and clattered onto the hardwood floor, joining the shattered remnants of the wine glass. Do not ever contact me again, Isabella sneered, pulling her white fur coat tightly around her shoulders. She followed her furious father out of the living room. The heavy oak front door slammed shut, sending a violent shudder through the entire house. David collapsed onto his knees, burying his face in his hands. A raw, agonizing sob tore through his throat as the absolute reality of his destruction finally settled over him. He had lost his prestigious job, his wealthy mistress, his professional reputation, and his entire financial foundation in the span of 10 minutes. His mother and father remained frozen on the love seat, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic fallout. They were sitting in a $1.5 million home owned entirely by the daughter-in-law they had ruthlessly abused. Now they were looking at their golden child sobbing on the floor, completely stripped of his power and his dignity. We have to call her, his mother shrieked, panic breaking through her shock. She is still legally your wife, David. She cannot just leave us like this. His father frantically pulled his cell phone from his pocket, his hands shaking violently. He dialed my number, pressing the phone tightly against his ear. The room was so quiet that everyone could hear the automated recording playing loudly through the receiver. The number you are trying to reach is currently unavailable, the robotic voice announced coldly. She blocked me, his father gasped, staring at the screen. Diana, try your phone. Call her right now. Diana frantically tapped my contact name on her screen, putting it on speakerphone. The exact same automated message echoed through the silent living room. They were completely blocked, cut off entirely from the billionaire they had desperately tried to impress. David pulled out his personal phone, ignoring the tears streaming down his face. He dialed my number over and over again, his thumb smashing the screen in a desperate, manic frenzy. Each message immediately bounced back, marked with an undeliverable error code. I had initiated a total communication blackout, severing every single digital tie to their toxic existence. "She is gone," David whispered, staring blankly at his useless phone. "She took everything." Jamal stood up from his accent chair in the corner of the room. He zipped up his heavy winter coat, adjusting his collar with calm, deliberate movements. The arrogant family that had constantly belittled him and tormented me was now completely drowning in a sea of their own making. He turned to his wife Diana, whose face was streaked with terrified tears. "Get your coat, Diana." Jamal ordered, his voice steady and resolute. "We are leaving." Jamal did not offer a single word of comfort to David or his parents. He simply turned and walked toward the front door, pulling his wife along with him, leaving the rest of them to choke on the bitter ashes of their ruined lives. The devastation. The heavy snowfall from the previous night had finally stopped, leaving the elite neighborhood buried under a thick, glittering blanket of white. Inside the sprawling $1.5 million estate, there was no festive joy. There was no exchange of expensive gifts or the comforting smell of a holiday breakfast. There was only the stale, sour stench of spilled wine and absolute despair. David lay awake on the living room floor, staring blankly at the massive television screen that remained completely black. His tailored cashmere sweater was heavily stained, and his eyes were bloodshot from a sleepless night of frantic, entirely unsuccessful attempts to contact anyone who could save him. His parents were huddled together on the plush sofa, shivering despite the expensive heating system. They had spent the entire night crying and blaming each other for the catastrophic implosion of their elite social standing. They were trapped in a paralyzing state of denial, desperately hoping the morning light would somehow reset the brutal reality of their situation. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, a series of heavy, authoritative knocks echoed violently through the silent house. The loud pounding rattled the thick oak front door, completely shattering the quiet tension in the foyer. David jumped to his feet, his heart hammering furiously against his ribs. A frantic spark of hope ignited in his chest. He genuinely believed I had returned to negotiate. He thought I had come back to offer him a generous financial settlement to keep the peace. He practically sprinted to the door and pulled it open, his rehearsed apologies already forming on his lips. But I was not standing on the porch. Instead, David found himself staring directly into the stern, uncompromising faces of two uniformed Boston police officers. Behind them stood a highly intimidating team of 4 private security contractors, dressed entirely in tactical black. The lead police officer stepped forward, holding a thick stack of official legal documents attached to a heavy clipboard. "David Blackwood," the officer stated, his voice completely devoid of holiday cheer. "We are here to execute an immediate court-ordered eviction on behalf of the Origen Corporate Trust. You and all other occupants are required to vacate these premises immediately." David stared at the officer in absolute disbelief. "You cannot evict me," David shouted, his legal arrogance temporarily flaring up. "I am a senior attorney. I live here. My wife and I purchased this property together. You have no legal jurisdiction to remove me on Christmas morning." The officer remained entirely unmoved by the frantic outburst. He handed the heavy clipboard directly to David. "You are legally classified as an unauthorized occupant," the officer explained coldly. "The deed to this property belongs exclusively to a corporate holding company. The primary shareholder revoked your guest privileges late last night. We have the emergency judicial order right here. You have exactly 10 minutes to gather your personal clothing and exit the property. If you refuse to comply, we will arrest you for criminal trespassing." David looked down at the documents. The complex legal terminology was flawless. The eviction order was ironclad, signed by a Supreme Court judge who clearly did not care about holiday sentiments when massive corporate property rights were violated. His parents rushed into the foyer, their faces pale with terror. "You cannot throw us out into the snow," his mother shrieked, clutching her silk robe tightly around her neck. "We have nowhere to go. We do not even have our winter boots." David frantically pulled out his phone, his hands shaking violently as he opened his banking application. "I will just book us a luxury hotel suite downtown," David declared, trying desperately to salvage a tiny shred of his crushed masculine pride. I will hire a private car to come get us. We do not need this wretched house. He tapped the screen to view his financial portfolio. The application loaded slowly, then displayed a bold, glaring error message. Account frozen. Available balance is $0. He swiped frantically to his credit cards. Every single platinum card was marked with a bright red suspended status. The realization hit him like a physical punch to the gut. The financial lockdown was absolute. He had no money, no credit, and no assets. He could not even afford a basic taxi ride to the nearest bus station. The private security team moved into the house with ruthless efficiency. They systematically directed David and his terrified parents out of the warm foyer and directly onto the freezing, snow-covered front porch. They were not allowed to pack any expensive artwork, high-end electronics, or luxury furniture. They were permitted to take only the coats hanging in the hall closet and the clothes currently on their backs. The heavy oak door slammed shut with a definitive final thud, locking automatically behind them. David stood barefoot in the bitter snow, wearing a stained sweater and holding a useless plastic phone. His mother began to wail miserably, wrapping her arms around herself as the freezing wind whipped against her skin. His father stared blankly at the locked door, completely broken by the sudden brutal plunge into absolute poverty. They were homeless, penniless, and entirely isolated on Christmas morning. Half a block down the street, I sat comfortably in the heated leather interior of a sleek black SUV. The tinted windows completely shielded me from their view, but I had a perfect, unobstructed sightline to their absolute misery. I watched the arrogant man who had tried to banish me shivering uncontrollably in the snow. My encrypted phone vibrated gently in my lap. I picked it up and read a toxic past was finally severed. I locked my phone and tapped the privacy glass separating me from my driver. Take me to the private airfield, I instructed calmly. The heavy vehicle pulled away smoothly, leaving David and his shattered family permanently in the cold. I leaned back into the plush leather, watching the snow-covered streets fly by, ready to board my jet and fly directly toward a sun-drenched private island where my brilliant new life was just beginning. The story of Nora's silent but absolute triumph over her emotionally abusive husband David and his opportunistic family serves as a profound masterclass in recognizing one's own worth. For years, Nora endured relentless belittlement, shrinking her life to accommodate the fragile ego of a man who viewed her as a liability. The core lesson embedded in this narrative is that true power lies in self-reliance and the refusal to let others dictate your value. Nora did not need to scream, beg, or argue to prove her worth to people committed to misunderstanding her. Instead, she quietly built an impenetrable foundation of success and financial independence. Her journey illustrates the immense danger of shrinking ourselves to fit into environments that refuse to respect us. David and his family constructed a reality based entirely on arrogant illusions and superficial status. But Nora's reality was grounded in tangible achievement and unshakable self-belief. Furthermore, the story teaches us that justice is often just the natural consequence of removing our protective shielding from those who take us for granted. When Nora initiated her financial lockdown and stepped into the light as the brilliant chief executive officer of Origen, she simply stopped subsidizing David's toxic delusions. We learn that we owe absolutely no loyalty to those who actively exploit our sacrifices. Walking away from a toxic environment is never a sign of weakness. It is the ultimate display of strength and self-respect. Ultimately, Nora's transformation from an accommodating partner to an empowered leader reminds us to fiercely guard our energy and cultivate our own independence. Never allow someone else's deep-seated insecurity to convince you that you are anything less than extraordinary. If you are currently compromising your brilliance to keep the peace in a toxic relationship, take back your power today and start building the spectacular future you truly deserve.